Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 37th day of the 108th Legislature second session. Our chaplain for today is Reverend Nathaniel Norval, Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church, Lincoln, Nebraska, a guest of Senator Sanders. Please rise.
Amen. Will you pray with me? Gracious and merciful God, we thank you, Lord, that another day has dawned, giving us the opportunity to glorify you once more. We thank you, God, for this beautiful land to which you have entrusted us. And we ask now, O God, that you pour out your wisdom upon the senators of this chamber. Surround them, Lord, with your strength, your counsel, and your comfort. Guide them along your path that they may enact laws that better the lives of every Nebraskan and bring glory to your name. We ask, Lord, that you see to the protection, safety, and welfare of all Nebraskans, and that your love, peace, and joy cover the good life from border to border. In the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord, we pray. Amen.
The Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by Colonel Gerald D. Jerry Meyer, 101st Airborne in Afghanistan in the Army, Seward, Nebraska, and Senator Hughes District.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I call to order the 37th day of the 108th Legislature, second session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Record, Mr. Clerk.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections this morning, sir.
Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
Single message, Mr. President. Letter from Governor Jim Pillen. Dear Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, and members of the legislature, communication from the governor. Dear Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, and members of the legislature, with this letter, I'm returning LB 307 without my approval and without my signature. I am vetoing LB 307 for the following reasons. Syringe service programs, SSPs, have been shown to increase drug deaths where they have been implemented. SSPs are not effective at decreasing drug usage and disease transmission when compared to other means. The bill as written would allow for children of any age to participate in these programs. I do not think it is prudent to encourage minors to abuse dangerous drugs instead of seeking out the substance abuse treatment they need to overcome drug addiction. SSPs have the potential to expose citizens to unattended, yet equally concerning health and safety risks as a result of improperly disposed needles. The studies the proponents of this bill have cited to demonstrate the effectiveness of SSPs in reducing the spread of HIV focus on programs that were stood up to combat the AIDS crisis in the 1980s and 1990s. Those programs differ substantially from the ongoing opioid crisis in terms of its geographic reach and lethality. Those studies also relied on a small sample size and self-reported data regarding individuals' drug use and typically do not consider the unintended consequences to individuals who are not receiving direct treatment. In fact, recent studies on the effectiveness of SSPs have found these programs only contribute to negligible reduction in HIV infections and at the expense of greater opioid-related deaths. For example, a study published in the Journal of Public Economics in June 2022 found that although SSPs may decrease HIV diagnosis rates by 1.1%, research also indicates these programs increase opioid-related mortality rates by 2 to 3.5%, or about 3 more cases per county per year due to an increase in the use of heroin and illicit fentanyl. Another study published in the National Bureau of Economic Research compared the health outcome of 79 counties from 2009 to 2016 found SSPs resulted in nearly 2 fewer cases of HIV per county per year, while resulting in 4 more drug-related deaths per county each year. Additionally, research published in the European Journal of Public Health analyzing HIV prevention strategies and indecent rates in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden suggested that high level of HIV testing and counseling would be more effective in preventing HIV transmission than legal access to needles and syringes. Evidence has also shown that the cost and number of needles that have ballooned in cities with established SSPs. In San Francisco, for example, health department records show the city handed out 3.3 million needles at a cost of $439,700 in fiscal year 2013-14. Just 2 years later, the number of needle distribution increased to 4.4 million at a cost of $363,000. San Francisco also has struggled with inadequate disposal of dirty needles, leaving vulnerable populations like children at risk of contracting deadly diseases. Of the 400,000 needles distributed monthly, the health department estimates that about 246,000 are returned through the city's syringe access and disposal sites, leaving more than 154,000 needles a month still unaccounted for. This has led the city to passing the $750,000 a year to hire people known as the syringe pickup crew to collect dirty needles on the streets and in area parks. All these costs add up and will lead to increased property taxes for residents of any municipality that chooses to institute a syringe service program. In Santa Ana, California, city officials have pushed back on state implementation of an SSP based on prior experience with the county program several years earlier. At the time, county employees reported the removal of 14,000 needles potentially contaminated with infectious diseases while clearing a 4-mile stretch of public land. The police chief and city manager sent letters to the opposition to the state last year citing safety and health concerns associated with the program. The mayor also spoke out in opposition to the state-adopted SSP. Simply put, adoption of LB 307 has the potential to expose our communities to the same issues that others have experienced as described above. Those are but a few examples. Additionally, Nebraskans do not think it is prudent to encourage minors to abuse dangerous drugs instead of seeking out the substance abuse treatment they need to overcome drug addiction. We should support less deadly ways of combating drug usage and the spreading of diseases. It is for these reasons that I urge you to sustain my vote of LB 307. Sincerely, Jim Pillen, Governor. That's all I have this morning, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Clemens would like to recognize the physician of the day, Dr. Dale Michaels of Walton. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature. Senator Sanders has some guests under the south balcony. Eric and Alexis Norval, please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LR 307, LR 308, and LR 309. Mr. Clerk, first item on the agenda.
Mr. President, first I'll select file LB 771A.
Mr. Speaker, you're recognized for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, as we begin all-day floor debate, I want to provide you with some general scheduling information going forward. Unless otherwise announced, we will continue to convene at 10 a.m. on the first day of the work week. Lunch recess will be from approximately noon to 1:30 for the first 3 days of the work week, and the last day of the work week will work through the lunch hour and adjourn between 1 or 3 o'clock, between 1 or 3. Adjournment time on the other days of the week will be around 5 p.m. Evening debate is scheduled to begin March 18th and last through April 9th. Please ensure you have left your session day evenings open during that time frame. I'll provide more specific scheduling information about evening debate at the end of next week. As you look at the calendar, we are on day 37. Day 57 is the final day for select if we are to pass all bills on final reading by day 59. We have 21 days remaining for debate of 16 priority bills sitting on select file, 45 priority bills on general file, and 32 bills which are in committee, many of which I expect to be advanced to general file. This does not include the biennial budget, which the Appropriations Committee will be placing on general file this Thursday, day 40. This will give members a 4-day weekend to review the budget. On Tuesday morning, Senator Clements will be holding a briefing to answer any questions members may have, and we will begin floor debate of the budget later that day. As you can see, we have a lot of work and little time to complete it. I will be asking each of you to work with me to maximize our floor time in the coming weeks. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Clerk, first item on the agenda.
Mr. President, first item on the agenda, select file. I have LB 771A. I have nothing on the bill, Senator.
Senator Slama, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 771A be advanced to ENR for engrossing.
Members, you have heard the motion to advance LB 77A to ENR engrossing. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. It is advanced. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, general file, Legislative Bill 1118, introduced by Senator McKinney. It's bill for enacting the cities of the second class. Changes provisions relating to the process for a mayor to remove an officer from office and repeal the original section. Bill was read for the first time on January 10th of this year and referred to the Urban Affairs Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file. There are no committee amendments, Mr. President.
Senator McKinney, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. LB 1118 would require the city council to be an additional party that consents to an officer's removal as conducted by the mayor. This is a change from the current law for cities of the second class, which allows mayors of cities of the second class to remove officers without any checks. This bill was brought to us by the league, but also by the city of Utan. This change will promote uniformity across our statutes. Cities of the metropolitan class, primary class, and first class, and villages have the city council as a check in the removal of municipal officers. In the case of cities of the metropolitan class, this has been in statute since 1921. This standard works and has been proven by long-standing use by other classifications of cities. This was voted on the Urban Affairs Committee, 6 yes votes and 1 absent senator. Without any questions, and I would ask for your green vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Seeing no one else in the queue, you're recognized to close and waive. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 1118 to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
41 ayes, no nays on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
LB 1118 is advanced to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk, next item.
Mr. President, next item, Legislative Bill 1143, introduced by the Health and Human Services Committee. It's a bill for an act relating to public health. Eliminates and replaces provisions relating to health districts, harmonized provisions, repeals the original section, and outright repeals several sections in Chapter 71. Bill was read for the first time on January 11th of this year and referred to the Health and Human Services Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file. There is nothing pending on the bill, Mr. President.
Senator Hansen, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, members of the legislature. As chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, I would like to open on LB 1143. LB 1143 was introduced by the Health and Human Services Committee on January 11th, 2024. The committee held the hearing for this bill on January 26, 2024, with no opposition testimony. The committee advanced LB 1143 to general file on February 13th with no amendments by 7-0 vote. LB 1143 repeals outdated statutes relating to health districts. Nebraska Revised Statute Section 71-1601 through 71-1625 are outright repealed, and current statutes relating to Medicaid, the state auditor, and medically handicapped children's services are updated. Health districts were created in 1939 and are not currently used. Presently, local public health departments are made up of county health departments, district health departments formed by interlocal agreements between one or more counties, and a city-county health department. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions best I can.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Seeing no one else in the queue, you're recognized to close and waive closing. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 1143 to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
42 ayes, no nays on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
It is advanced. Mr. Clerk, next item on the agenda.
Mr. President, general file, Legislative Bill 877, introduced by Senator Holcroft. It's a bill for an act relating to assessment of property. Changes provisions relating to the special valuation of agricultural or horticultural land, provides for retroactive applicability, repeals the original section, declares an emergency. Bill is read for the first time on January 3rd of this year and referred to the Revenue Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file. There are committee amendments, Mr. President.
Senator Holcroft, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. And good morning, colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about LB 877. I would like to thank Speaker Arch for adding this bill to the consent calendar. LB 877 is simply a cleanup bill to LB 580 that was passed last year as part of the LB 727 package. As you will remember, LB 580 allowed producers to retain their special tax valuation on agricultural or horticultural land until such land is commercially developed. This bill resulted in some unintended consequences for small farm parcels. LB 877 adds the word contiguous to the bill language, resulting in, quote, the land shall consist of 5 contiguous acres or more. LB 877 also reinstates language that was struck from LB 580. This makes allowance for farm operations that are less than 5 acres as long as certain conditions are met. I feel it is important to address this in a timely fashion, which is why there is an emergency clause in the bill. We worked with the Reviser of Statutes Office, county assessors from Johnson, Lancaster, and Sarpy counties, as well as other stakeholders to make these changes. At the hearing, we had proponents who were farmers, the county assessors, the Nebraska Association of County Officials, Farm Bureau, cattlemen, corn growers, pork producers, soybean association, Nebraska Dairy Association, and the Nebraska Farmers Union. There were no opponents and no neutral testifiers. Initially, we had a retroactive clause in this bill so that those negatively affected by LB 580 would not be financially impacted. However, this clause was called into question for possibly being unconstitutional. So AM 2420 was drafted to remove this language. I would like to thank the members of the Revenue Committee for their consideration of this bill, LB 877, and the amendment were voted unanimously out of the committee on February 13th. There is no fiscal note associated with this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Holdcroft. Senator Conrad has some guests in the north balcony. She would like to recognize members from Cause Collective. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. As the clerk indicated, there is a committee amendment. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Holdcroft, for the heads up. Good morning, colleagues. AM 2420 to LB 877 changes one item. The amendment strikes language in the original bill that would have retroactively applied the changes in the bill to January 1, 2023. This was done to avoid any potential problems with the constitutionality of the retroactively applying a change to property taxes. I would ask this body to support AM 2420 and LB 877 and advance them to select file. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Seeing no one else in the queue, you're recognized to close on the amendment and waive. Senator Wayne, you're in the queue. You're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will Senator Holcroft yield to a question?
Senator Holcroft, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Holcroft, can you just give me a refresher? I heard you when I was walking on my way up, just a refresher of what this bill does.
Yes, last year we had LB 580, which addressed the farmland that was annexed by Gretna back in 2017. So what that allowed, that bill addressed an annexation by Gretna of about 3,000 acres, 880 acres of it was farmland. This 580 allowed that land to be continue to hold its agricultural taxation valuation. But there was an amendment from the committee to make it 5 acres or larger, looking mostly that, we're taking away the city limits, and therefore there was a potential here for abuse of that statute. As it turned out, there happened to be hundreds of small farm parcels legitimately being farmed, and they lost their tax valuation as agriculture. So this bill, we worked it with the county assessors. We tweaked some language in it to make sure that those small parcels of farmland are covered now, and that's what this bill is about.
Outside of those 5 acres or next to Gretna, where else could this apply to?
There are a few parcels in Lancaster County also.
And do you know of anywhere else?
Well, potentially there could be across Nebraska as cities expand, but those are the only two that really expressed some concern was Lancaster, Sarpy County, and we also had essentially the Association of County Assessors worked with us on the language.
So what will this bill do to the property taxes in that particular area, or the three areas you just mentioned?
It would allow them to preserve their special taxation as agricultural land.
What kind of special taxation do they have?
They have 75%, I believe it's 75% of the actual value.
So without this bill, they would be taxed regular?
Yes, for those 5 acre parcels, or 5 acres or less parcels, which there are a significant number of them.
So is this government changing the market conditions to make it more suitable for property owners, or does this make it better for the buyer or the seller?
It makes it better for the farmer who owns the land and is trying to turn a profit on his land.
So colleagues, on consent calendar, we're dealing with property tax issue on a consent calendar. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senators Wayne and Holdcroft. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak. Wave. Members, no one else in the queue. The question is the advancement of AM 2420 to the adoption of that amendment. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
36 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment, Mr. President.
AM 2420 is adopted. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Yes, I support the amendment in the bill. This just happened when Gretna expanded their city limits, and it brought some farmland inside the city limits, and the assessors were required to raise the valuations up to maybe $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 an acre, which is development land price, and it was going to force people who were just keep farming. The tax would be way more than the revenue on that property, and so this lets them, as long as they keep farming it, lets them use farmland valuation. So I ask for your green vote, LB 877. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me be real brief here. I'm listening to Senator Holdcroft talk about the taxation percentage. I think the key factor in this bill is we're saying that the land will still be classified as agricultural land inside the city limits, because that's the key, is being classified as agricultural land and taxed as farmland, not taxed as industrial land or some other class of land that would be priced significantly higher, as Senator Clements outlined. So that's the key, and I think Senator Clements outlined it very well. That's not just in this case. There are other areas around the state where you're reluctant to have land annexed into the city because all of a sudden it becomes classified as something other than agricultural use, and so consequently you get a different classification in terms of how it's valued. So that's the key. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Erdman would like to announce a guest under the south balcony, Mark Wickard of Bridgeport, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Hunt would like to announce a guest under the south balcony, Bobby Navarro from Atlanta, Georgia. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Will Senator Jacobson yield to a question?
Senator Jacobson, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
So I have a lot of farmland in my district that's also inside the city. So does this apply to them, or are they just out of the deal?
We're talking about 5 acre tracts.
Yeah, I have 5-acre tracts up by Lake Cunningham. I have 5-acre tracts going north of there that are also, Lake Cunningham's a prime example where just east of there is all city and west of there is all city. And so.
But they would be farming it as well.
Yes, Winninghoff farms it on a regular basis. So I'm trying to figure out, does this apply?
My understanding is it would, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senators Wayne and Jacobson. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Holcroft, you're recognized to close and waive. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 877 to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
40 yeas, no nays on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
The bill is advanced to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk, next item on the agenda.
Mr. President, next item, Legislative Bill 998, introduced by Senator Conrad. It's a bill for enacting the state government. Adopts the State Acceptance of Gifts Act, changes and eliminates provisions relating to acceptance of gifts, harmonized provisions, provides an operative date, repeals the original section, and outright repeals section 30-241, 242, and 243. Bill is read for the first time on January 5th of this year and referred to the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file. There's nothing on the bill, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I'm pleased to present LB 998. This measure was brought to me by our friends in the Association of Former Legislators. They had identified a series of statutory and budgetary provisions that all governed the acceptance of state gifts in perhaps slightly different ways when they were engaged on the important, historic, and worthy endeavor to raise private funds to finish the incredible courtyards in our state capitol. After that successful statewide campaign that beautified our unique, impressive, and stunning state capitol and ensured that our courtyards were revived to the original vision, the state legislators, the former State Legislators Association, recognized that the state could benefit from additional clarity to update and harmonize technical aspects about the acceptance of state gifts. We had a great hearing on this before the Government Committee, which I'm proud to be a member of. The measure advanced quickly and unanimously, with only our friend Senator Raybould gone due to medical issues, illness, and this has a $0 fiscal note, and I deeply appreciate the former state senators bringing it forward, my colleagues on the Government Committee moving it forward, and would like to add a note of gratitude to Speaker Arch for designation and consideration on our first consent calendar of 2024. I am happy to answer any questions and would urge your favorable support.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Seeing no one else in the queue, you're recognized and waive closing. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 998 to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
42 ayes, no nays on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
LB 998 advances to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk, next item on the agenda.
Mr. President, next item, Legislative Bill 1162, introduced by Senator Lowe. It's a bill for enacting the county government. changes provisions relating to reimbursement for mileage earned by sheriffs, and repeals the original section. Bill was read for the first time on January 11th of this year and referred to the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Lowe, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. LB 1162 was brought to me by NACO and county sheriffs to clarify two issues about mileage reimbursement collected by county sheriffs when they serve process. The state auditor had brought these issues to their attention this summer. Years ago, county sheriffs and deputies sometimes used their personal vehicles rather than county vehicles when they were serving civil process. They were allowed to collect mileage fees on this service. Today, sheriffs and deputies use county vehicles to serve process, but an Attorney General's opinion from 1993 concluded that they can't charge mileage fees when they are using a county vehicle, even when those fees would be turned over to the county. This problem is especially apparent when they are using county vehicles to serve process in a civil suit, but the mileage cannot be assessed as charged against the complaining party. This bill is intended to make it clear that these mileage fees can be collected by the sheriff unless the sheriff or an employee is using a personal vehicle. The sheriff pays these fees to the county treasurer and they are placed in the county general fund. This reflects the current practice. The second clarification of LB 1162 deals with the process for sheriffs reporting and paying these fees to the county treasurer. Section 33-11-7 requires the sheriffs to make quarterly reports to the county board showing the amount of fees collected or earned. This raises the question, which should they report, collected or earned, or both? The amendment would clarify that they should report the fees collected. In addition, current law requires them to pay the fees earned, whether or not they have been collected, to the county treasurer. LB 1162 would require payment only after the fees have been collected. This bill was supported by NACO and the State Sheriff's Association. The auditor's office testified in neutral capacity. The amendment attached to this bill strikes as earned in 3 spaces and simply rewards one sentence in order to ensure the language is as clear as possible. The bill was voted out of the Government, Military, and Veterans Committee on a 6-0 vote with 2 absent. I want to thank Speaker Arch for choosing this as a consent calendar bill, and I would urge a green vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. As stated, there is a committee amendment. Senator Brewer, you're recognized to open on the committee amendment.
Hang on, looking through my notes here.
All right, now we got it. Thank you, Mr. President. Government Committee heard LB 1162 on 2nd of February. The sheriffs and NACO both came in and testified in support. The auditor's office testified in a neutral capacity, and further discussions between NACO and the auditor's office, and we determined the language in the bill needs to be tuned up a little. The cleanup amendment makes these minor changes. The committee voted LB 1162 out with AM 2500 with no opposition. And I'm asking for your green vote on AM 2500 to LB 1162. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Seeing no one else in the queue, you're recognized to close on the amendment and waive. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2500. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
38 ayes, no nays on adoption of the committee amendment, Mr. President.
The amendment is adopted. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Lowe, you're recognized to close and waive. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 1162 to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
36 ayes, 1 nay on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
LB 1162 is advanced to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk, for the next item on the agenda.
Mr. President, I've got an announcement quickly. The Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee will hold an executive session at 11 o'clock under the north balcony. Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee, exec session at 11 o'clock under the north balcony. Next on the agenda, Mr. President, Legislative Bill 851, general file. Bill is introduced by Senator Jacobson. It's a bill for an act relating to the Department of Economic Development, changes provisions relating to internship grants, provides an operative date, repeals the original section, declares an emergency. Bill is read for the first time on January 3rd of this year and referred to the Business and Labor Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file. There are committee amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to open on the bill.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And again, this is a bill that was brought to me by the Department of Economic Development. It really just expands. It does a couple of things, but primarily it expands the size of the business from 50 employees to 150 employees. The reason for that is we believe that being able to provide a broader experience, we think that that would probably open up 1,900 additional businesses to be able to use this program. We think that those businesses over 150 employees are likely going to have their own program and wouldn't utilize this. We're just trying to maximize the experience that these students could get. The other thing we're doing is there's a simple cleanup in the amendment that really cleans it up to make it abundantly clear that when it comes to telecommuting, the original language, if you had to think pretty hard to understand that it allowed telecommuting, but there were so many questions on it that this cleans up that language. So again, it's just primarily increasing the size of the businesses that can utilize the program. $7,500 per student per year. High school, college, and are all eligible for this program. You must go to a college in the state of Nebraska, and you must work for businesses located in the state of Nebraska. Again, thank you, Speaker Arch, for allowing the bill to come up, and I would encourage your green vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. As stated, there is a committee amendment. Senator Reapy, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Business and Labor Committee voted 7-0 to adopt AM 2207 to LB 851. This committee amendment clarifies the intent of the Intern Nebraska program to allow telecommute opportunities throughout the state of Nebraska. Rather than striking subsection 5 in its entirety, this amendment allows a student intern to telecommute if the business is located in Nebraska and the student enrolled is in a higher education institution in Nebraska. I encourage your green vote on AM 2207 to LB 851. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Reapy. Seeing no one else in the queue, you're recognized to close on the amendment and waive. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2207. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
43 ayes, no nays on adoption of the committee amendment, Mr. President.
The amendment is adopted. Senator Vargas would like to recognize some guests seated under the north balcony. They are Cammie Olsleigel, Katie Meredith, and Kevin Fields, all with the Nebraska School Counselors of the Year. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to close and waive closing on the bill. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 851 to E and R initial. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
42 ayes, no nays on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
LB 851 is advanced to E and R initial. Mr. Clerk, next item.
Mr. President, next item, select file Legislative Bill 43. First of all, Senator, I have E and R amendments.
Senator Slama, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that the ENR amendments to LB 43 be adopted.
Members, you've heard the motion to adopt the E and R amendments. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. They are adopted.
Mr. President, Senator Brewer has AM 2649 with a note he would withdraw and substitute AM 2812.
Without objection, it is withdrawn. And substitute. Yeah. Senator Brewer, you're recognized to open on AM 2812.
Thank you, Mr. President. All right, stay with me here because we got a few that we got to run through to keep everybody on the same sheet of music. AM 2812 will add Senator Albright's bill, and that's part of what we're changing in the package here. So we have what was AM 2649, which is now 2812, and it is a result of many hours of discussion between my office, the Bar Association, the Attorney General, the Governor's Office, and other members of the body, including Senator Conrad. Let me explain what the amendment does. It makes changes to the base bill, which is Senator Sanders 43. It allows courts to handle sections of the law or regulations that are unclear. It tells the courts that they are not to just rely on a state agency to tell the court how to interpret the law or the agency's own rules. The amendment rewords the bill to make sure that the courts know what they need to do. The second AM tunes up, and this is Senator McDonald's cybersecurity bill, LB 650. This makes it clear that the local government units, they get the same protection. They get the same protection as state agencies. And the third one is AM 2649, tweaks Senator Conrad's public records bill with LB 366. The current language, it has the custodians of public records attesting to the cost estimate that they're making when they request public records. This would require the use of a public notary for example, at my district, that would mean that a county clerk would have to drive a considerable distance in order to get things notarized. This allows them to proceed and add an extra expense. The amendment gets rid of that requirement. After dropping these amendments, we did identify one other technical change that needs to be made, and I'll talk about that on my next time on the mic. Or do you want me to go ahead and finish it? Oh, I substitute, so yes. So the last would be what was AM 2740. That's going to be rolled in with AM 2812. After we went through a long process of negotiating AM, again, what was 2649, now 2812, our legal counsel discovered that we'd left out a technical cleanup that was needed in one of the other bills in the package. The other bill, Senator Sanders, LB 297, needed a technical fix to make sure that we did not take out our State Department of Banking, and that would put them out of compliance with federal law. So this would change that. It's simply a cleanup amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Senator Vargas has some guests he would like to announce in the north balcony. Members from the Nebraska school counselors representing 11 districts across the state, please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of LB 43 and Amendment 2812 that Senator Brewer has put forth. Senator Brewer, as chair, did a great job explaining some of the component parts of this legislation that is one of the government committee priority packages for this session. And he also did a great job of providing an overview of the hours and hours of negotiation amongst many stakeholders to try and make appropriate amendments to this measure from where it started on general file and where it is today in terms of select file. I believe that the key components therein is a weakening perhaps of the original intent in LB 43 that Senator Sanders put forward and that I am a proud co-sponsor of. I would have preferred to see the original language remain, which brought a limitation and restraint upon government lawyers and actors and favored individual personal liberty. But due to pushback from the Attorney General's office and the Governor's office, this seemed to be language that was able to generate consensus on the administrative practice component. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity to move forward together in the future to strengthen our approach to individual rights and liberty in administrative practice, and this will perhaps just be a starting point for that. Because it impacts so many areas of our life, from rule and regulation making in health and human services. Think about individual citizens fighting against the Department of Revenue on matters of taxation. And then think, of course, about issues related to rules and regulations for those in confinement. So it is broad-ranging and important, and unfortunate that it had to be weakened to advance, but I do think that we can live with this compromise at this moment. Additionally, Senator Brewer was right. We worked very hard with government entities, primarily through the League and NACO and school boards, to make slight adjustments in regards to the attestation components or the notary components that were part of the original bill and that were advanced on general file, to remove that component. We removed that component related to the notary for a couple of reasons. One, access and availability, as Senator Brewer noted, particularly for those governmental entities in greater or rural Nebraska, and with the understanding and reaffirmation that failure to comply with our strong public records law already subjects the public official to criminal penalties, as is present in current law. Finally, there is a slight modification to remove sensitive matters related to cybersecurity for all governmental entities, and to provide some clarity on that behalf that the university brought forward. Colleagues, I'm going to spend some time talking about the public records component of the underlying bill and the amendments before you today, because I think it's very important that we reaffirm our state's proud and strong tradition of open government and transparency that is primarily effectuated through two main tools, our open meetings laws and our public records laws. And there has been an ongoing evisceration and weakening of those tools of citizen engagement really across the board at a breathtaking pace, from the highest echelons of state government through city and county governments at the school board level and otherwise. I'm going to punch in again because I want to make sure to be clear on that point. I do expect a robust debate today. I think it will be helpful. The government committee has worked very, very hard to bring this package forward, and it seeks to, I think, on the whole, enhance citizen engagement through our tools of transparency like our open meetings law and our Public Records Act. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. My concerns or my area of interest in this bill right now is mostly focused on what we're calling the state RFRA portion of the bill. And I was wondering if Senator Brewer would yield to some questions.
Senator Brewer, would you yield to some questions?
Yes.
Senator Brewer, was your intent, or do you think the intent of this bill and your committee amendments is to model the federal RFRA statute?
Yes.
And so it would be your understanding that what we're trying to do here is follow along with the same case law that the feds have with respect to their interpretation of the federal RFRA?
Correct. And there'll be handouts that will be being passed around by the pages that will show case law in the past that they've done.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Brewer. So, colleagues, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because there are folks who have sincerely held religious beliefs for a number of different things that we as a state have decided are not things that we would like to have happen in our state. For example, female genital mutilation. For example, beating your wife with a stick no bigger than the size of your thumb. For example, beating your children into submission. Child brides, a whole bunch of different things like that that might be sincerely held religious beliefs. But this RFRA does not allow that to happen, because what would be the situation is that the court would have to weigh the question of your sincerely held religious belief against the state's very sincere and necessary interest in preventing things like child brides and things like that. So in that circumstance, the state's compelling interest would outweigh an individual's sincerely held religious belief. That's what the federal case law has been saying. I've been reading through some of this and talking with several folks about the federal case law, and it's my understanding that we would follow that federal case law so that not every sincerely held religious belief would be upheld just because someone believed it. So it still is something that we want to make sure that we are making a record about, and that we're making a record about the fact that although this bill does say that your religious beliefs, your sincerely held religious beliefs, could in some very specific circumstances be used as a defense in a criminal proceeding, that is a very narrow set of circumstances in which you can use these beliefs as a defense, and it would still require a weighing of the state's compelling interest and whether or not the state's compelling interest was done in the law in the least restrictive manner, but still giving deference to their compelling state interest in preventing some of these kinds of harms and and other sorts of things. So I just wanted to make sure we have that on the record. I might talk about it a little bit more later, but I appreciate Senator Brewer, and I appreciate everyone for making the record that what we're trying to do here is follow the case law, not only of the federal government, which has had a RFRA since the late 90s, but also the states, the several other states that have one as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Albright, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to just talk a little bit about a portion of AM 2812 that is within the amendment is LB 637 that I've had on the books for a while. And I just want to stand and thank Senator Brewer and the Government Committee for kicking that out. I think it came out 7-1. And but it just promotes transparency and accountability in government and offers the members of the public an opportunity to trust that they'll be heard. I'll give you a couple quick examples. You know, when I was on a city council back in a few years back, we had a super Walmart coming to our area, and believe me, it went 15 hours at the Planning Commission, 15 hours at the City Council, and they heard everyone. It became a better project. It became probably one of the nicest super Walmarts, I feel, in the state. And it was only because we took the time to listen to everyone. But, you know, I'm hearing a lot about, there's a lot of different governmental agencies that will not take the time to put it on their agenda, even if it's just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you want it to be. It could be at the beginning of the meeting before you talk about anything else. And if there's 50 people there and it's just 10 minutes, they might have to come back the next week or the next week. But for 10 minutes, you're going to take public comment. That doesn't mean you listen to every single person that evening that's in your chamber. It's all about getting the information from the people. You don't even have to answer back to them. You're just simply listening to their concerns. So this bill, I think, would be important to the public to know that they do have a right. It's already in law. We just had to just make certain that it's not in closed session, of course. That's only the members that are talking about something that the public doesn't need to know about right away. If it's a dismissal of someone, or someone's had something that maybe shouldn't be out in the public until it's decided on how it's going to be taken care of. But the biggest thing is just the trust in our government, that they're going to listen to people. And it's in state law. It just codifies everything in this. So I appreciate taking the time to put that in law. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I'm not sure where I'm at on 2812 yet, because it was just substituted this morning, but I was looking through it, and Senator Albright's portion is probably one of the bigger portions, and I agree with it in principle. I think making sure that our Open Meetings Act is, widely applicable and creates transparency is important. I'm just going to grab it here. So I'm trying to look at this section. I think it's the first section of the amendment on page 1, which is basically saying that the Open Meetings Act shall apply to the public has a right to attend and the right to speak at meetings of public bodies, and all are part of the meeting of the public body except for closed sessions called pursuant to section 84-1410 and may be videotaped, televised, photographed, broadcast, or recorded by any person in attendance by means of tape recording, camera, video equipment, and other means of pictorial or sonic reproduction or in writing. And then the addition here is, except for closed sessions called pursuant to section 84-1410, the public body shall allow members of the public an opportunity to speak at each meeting. So essentially saying that people shall be able to speak at every meeting. So you can't call a meeting an open meeting that doesn't allow for public comment. Seems like a decent idea in principle. I was trying to pull up the committee statement to see what was the opposition to this bill, since Senator Albright said it was, I think, 7-1. So I'll pull that up when I have the opportunity and see what folks' opposition to that was. Just curious. But yes, I appreciate Senator Albright bringing this bill, and I appreciate the committee considering putting it in the package, because I do think that allowing people, in principle, the opportunity to speak at public meetings and making sure those meetings are open is extremely important, and support that idea. My other concerns with AM 2812 are those that have been articulated by folks before, which is I guess would be considered compromise language as it pertains to the original LB 43 that strikes through the requirements of consideration of the administrative body, and then strikes and limits the interpretation of rights of individuals in these hearings, and brings it down, I would say, from consistent with individual liberty down to consistent with individuals' fundamental constitutional rights. And like all things around here, and obviously I stood up and proposed an amendment to this bill on the first round and talked about constraining the section that Senator DeBoer was just speaking about, which is considered the RFRA portion, the religious freedom portion. I actually have an amendment that we'll get to maybe next. I'm not exactly sure where in the queue my amendment would be that pertains to that, and I'll talk about it when we get to it. But I do think compromise language is important, and as bills progress, we should talk in good faith about what compromises can be made to make a bill better or to mitigate the harms. And I think there's still a lot of space for work, particularly on the RFRA portion of this. I did like the more expansive version of the original LB 43, but I do see, like all things, compromise is important, and we should be taking that into consideration as we move forward. So I'm going to keep listening to folks talking about AM 2812, and I'll take a look at the committee statement.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. But I would be curious if anybody had some insight into what the opposition was to making sure everybody can speak at meetings. And, the cleanup portions, obviously, I think there's good reason for those for the underlying bill. But I'll push my light and get back in after I've got an opportunity to read the committee statement. And then, of course, like I said, I have my amendment that pertains to specifically the RFRA section that we'll talk about after this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I've been listening to the conversation here, and I've had a chance to review the amendment and obviously LB 43 after our last debate. I think I'm generally supportive of AM 2812 with regard to its intent of trying to sort of bring together some of the work here, but I think there may be some unintended consequences in it that I'm unsure about. And with LB 43, I also still support the underlying intent of what we were trying to do. I think that obviously ensuring religious freedom is one of the most important things we can do here in the legislature. But I do have concerns still about the way that the legislation is written. And I just wanted to raise a couple of those. And similar to Senator John Kavanaugh, continue listening to some of the debate and the conversation about that. First of all, Senator DeBoer, I think, hit the nail on the head with regards to one of my concerns, which is the ability that this legislation has opening up as a defense in a criminal action, the allegation that somebody has a sincerely held religious belief that is being burdened or restricted. I do think the language on page 2, Section 4 is overly broad. It specifically says a person or religious organization whose exercise of religion or religious service has been burdened or restricted or is likely to be burdened or restricted in violation of this act may then assert that violation in any impending case as a defense. And so what it sounds like they're doing is creating a defense that could be asserted, I suppose, in a court of law, arguing a defense to various criminal actions, so long as you're saying that you have the sincerely held religious belief. But it's not even that religious belief need be burdened or restricted in the immediate circumstance. The language of this section says that it is an ability to assert that defense if it's likely to be burdened or restricted. And I just find that to be incredibly broad. I think we can all come up with hypotheticals and scenarios and situations wherein somebody might assert the potential infringement on their religious belief as a defense. And again, Senator DeBoer, I think, highlighted a couple of those that have been brought up both at the federal level and at other states. I understand there's a handout that we're going to be getting with regards to some of the other courts from other states and at the federal level and what they've decided with regards to these defenses. I've not had a chance to review that in great detail. I'm happy to take a look at that. But certainly what other courts have done is not binding on what Nebraska does. And I do have concerns that if LB 43 were to pass, it would effectively open up the floodgates to the ability for these kind of defenses to be made in cases that we see on a regular basis. And I just think that it would not be the intention of LB 43 to allow for somebody to assert religious belief or potential impending or impeding of a religious belief as a defense to say child abuse or things or neglect or things like that. So I think there's more cleanup that needs to be done on that. I don't think the concerns that I raised on general file are really answered with the amendment. In addition to that, I think there's a continued concern about whether or not the political subdivision torts claim act applies here. Specifically, going back to section 4, which I think is one of the more operative sections with this portion, again, excuse me, says that a person or religious organization whose exercise of religion or religious service has been burdened or restricted or is likely to be burdened or restricted may bring a civil action against any of the individuals who did that. And then it goes on to say, this section applies regardless of whether the state or a political subdivision is a party to the judicial or administrative proceeding. So in the event that any individual feels that their exercise of religion or religious service has been burdened, or even if any individual feels that their exercise of religion is likely to be burdened or restricted, they could bring a civil, thank you, Mr. President, they could bring a civil action, they could sue political subdivision in an effort to push back on that. And then it goes on page 3 to say that that individual may obtain appropriate relief, specifically actual damages. And so, again, I have concerns about the potential outcome and ramification that we could see here with regards to the broadness that is allowed by that. So I'm curious if the Political Subdivision Torts Claim Act applies here. I think it is referenced briefly a couple of times, but it doesn't seem to, I think, clarify or be clear as to whether or not the process and procedure of that is still operative. So again, very, very supportive of a lot of the ideas in here. I think ensuring the free exercise of religion is just as important as ensuring that we don't have any kind of state religion asserted upon us. I think both parts of that First Amendment clause are vital, and I think we continue all to agree on that. We just need to make sure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Reapy has some guests in the north balcony he'd like to recognize. They are fourth graders and teachers from Norris Elementary in Millard, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I want to speak specifically to the components of the amendments and the bill related to updating and strengthening our Public Records Act. I started at this my first time on the mic and ran out of time. Friends, you've heard me say many times, and I know this to be true, is that we have a proud and strong tradition of open government in Nebraska. And we have had for many years what many stakeholders across the political spectrum would consider to be very good laws, very strong laws regarding open meetings and public records access, so that citizens have a right to know what their government is doing in their name and with their money. And it doesn't matter what the citizen's motive is in gleaning that information. I have practiced in public records and open meetings laws as a civil rights attorney through most of my career. And I can say without hesitation that for many years, the laws worked as intended to empower citizens against a powerful government to figure out what was happening, to shine sunlight on the operations of government. And what I have seen in recent years in particular is a slow and steady evisceration of transparency. And whether it's against Liberty Moms, folks who are skeptical about our elections, BLM activists, reporters, or just everyday citizens who are concerned about the price of gravel. I have seen a clamping down from the top of state government down to local government on a citizen's right to know what their government is doing in their name and with their money. In fact, there has been a push and almost a legal subculture developing amongst government lawyers and lobbyists in their law departments to exploit exceptions to our strong transparency laws, to manipulate and twist meanings and narrow scopes, to thwart public records requests, and to hinder open meetings laws, and to keep the public from knowing what their government is doing in their name and with their money. And that is wrong, and it must stop. There are a number of bills that colleagues have brought forward to address these issues regarding a citizen's right to know and to empower our public in a democracy. Senator Albright has LB 637, which is now part of this amendment, to ensure members of the public have a right to speak at open meetings. Senator Sanders has LB 71, which has been prioritized by my friend Senator Meyer, that deals with improving and enhancing parental rights and transparency in regard to school curricula and materials. Senator Linehan has LB 951, which seeks to ensure more openness in quasi-public associations made up of public officials. And we've had numerous other measures before the Government Committee, the Education Committee, and other committees in this regard. At almost every hearing on these bills, numerous government lawyers and lobbyists appear and oppose these reforms. The opposition is mostly centered upon some sort of burden or inconvenience to the government, without any concern to the inconvenience and burden those bad acts put on the individual citizen and the public. They've got it wrong, colleagues. The government is there to serve the people, not the other way around. Almost all of the testimony is centered in something like this. We support open government, but we support transparency, but. Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, frankly, that is disingenuous and that is patronizing, and it is wrong. Most individual citizens do not have the time or resources to secure legal counsel to fight back against big government, to understand what is happening in their name and with their money. And we have seen case after case, including a recent one, make its way to the Nebraska Supreme Court, fighting over what our public records laws mean or don't mean. And thus far, consistently, the Nebraska Supreme Court, and rightly, has come down on the side of citizens' right to know and against big government hiding the ball by playing games with public meetings and public records laws. I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to hit in one more time so I can finish this because it's really important for legislative history. But
That's
I want
your
to
time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, again, I rise in, I guess, I'm still a little on the fence about 2812. I did have a chance to read the committee statement. I saw that there were a lot of folks in favor of the bill, including the ACLU, and then there were some folks opposed who were mostly representatives of local government entities, so like the League of Municipalities. And so my interpretation of that, I didn't get a chance to go out and talk to the folks in the league about this, but my interpretation is that this is the type of, where we're telling them how to run their meetings, I guess. And I was hearing a lot of what Senator Conrad was saying, and I echo a lot of her feelings about making sure that we're making government open and available to folks, and the parts about the records requests I think is really important. We do want to tread lightly as we're giving more directives to local governments. But I do think that when it comes to open government and it comes to opportunity for people to comment and opportunity for people to interact with their government, I think that us elected officials, the inconvenience of sitting through hearings, we're all familiar with that, right? We all have been in hearings that go on for hours and hours, and that's a really important part of the job for the public to be able to come in and comment and be heard, and to have that part of their role in government. And we take those comments into consideration, just like right now, where I went and read the committee statement to see who had come and spoke about it, so I can get a feel for what the opposition is. And so I think it's really important that we do not put undue constraints on people's ability to seek redress from their government and to have an opportunity to be heard. And so I think, like I said, I generally support the principle articulated by Senator Albright's bill, and I guess I have not been dissuaded in my interest of supporting that bill yet from what I've heard. But again, the other parts of the amendment I think are generally okay. I do wish we weren't constraining LB 43 as much as we are. So I see there's a few other folks in the queue, so I'll continue to listen to see what other folks have to say about that. But at the moment, I'd say I'm planning to vote green on AM 2812. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Mosier, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, Nebraskans. So in reading the amendment and from some discussions I had with some people from the League of Municipalities, it appears that this broadens the public interface with public bodies, or attempts to, but it already in statute allows for people to make comments at meetings. I don't know that this amendment is necessary, and I think it, from my experience of being mayor for 12 years, we gave people the opportunity to speak as long as it was something on the agenda. Otherwise, if you allow them to speak about whatever, you could be there for hours if you didn't try to limit that. So I think there's some kind of amendment. I don't have the wording clear in my mind yet, but I think we need to do something to address the change in people's right to speak. I think people should have a right to speak to their people, their elected representatives when they're spending money, but I don't know that every meeting that they have would necessarily have to have time for open comment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak, and this would be your third opportunity on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll try and be as quick as I can here. Continuing in regards to some recent legal activity surrounding our public records laws. Just a few weeks ago down the hall, there was a case that was argued before the Nebraska Supreme Court dealing with the propriety of a state agency demanding an exorbitant amount of money, almost $45,000, to search for emails. I reviewed the various briefs filed in the appeal, including from right of center think tanks like the Goldwater Institute that was fighting against the smugness and the arrogance of government lawyers and lobbyists who sought to thwart openness in response to these public records requests. In reading the briefs and watching the oral arguments, I was also struck by the smugness and arrogance of the amicus brief filed by the League of Municipalities, the Nebraska Association of School Boards, the Nebraska Association of County Officials, and the County Attorneys Association. Friends, in their amicus brief, they assert that the legislature did not mean what in fact we meant. They implied that we as state senators in former debates were too stupid or ignorant as to understand what we meant in continually updating and strengthening our public records laws. The amici were arguing that despite the legislature's clear intent, we meant just the opposite. That's why I felt it so critical to reaffirm at this moment through this debate once again the legislature's intent in regards to the public's right to know. And the twisting and the evisceration of these tools of transparency needs to stop. And we need to send a message to these government lawyers and lobbyists and to future courts that will be reviewing this record. I was also disappointed by the Attorney General's position in that argument before the Supreme Court. The lawyer in the Attorney General's office framed the agency's position that the case was about a request to have the government do free hours of work for the requester. Friends, that is an offensive mischaracterization of the issues before the court. Most basically, who does the Attorney General think the government works for? Themselves? A certain political party? That is wrong. They work for the citizens. The Public Records Act contains a provision by which the Attorney General is also supposed to intercede to help citizens who are not getting access to public records. The Attorney General has a statutory obligation to the people of Nebraska to help in this regard. In this regard, the Attorney General worked solely as a lawyer for the government instead of a lawyer for the people. To be fair, it was not Attorney General Hilgers that handled that oral argument, but it was one of his staff members. The audacity in the parlance of the Attorney General in the course of that debate was, I agree, breathtaking. Mr. President and members of the body, we have to reaffirm yet again what we mean. The public has a right to know. That is why the government committee has worked very hard to put forward thoughtful components to update and strengthen our Public Records Act, to empower citizens against a powerful government, to ensure that they have access to curriculum issues, that they have access to funding issues, that they have access to the information they need to do their jobs as citizens in a democracy. I am grateful that we have been able to build such a powerful right-left coalition when it comes to open government and government transparency. I am proud to join with Senator Sanders, Senator Albright, Senator Brewer, and members of our diverse committee to put forward an unequivocal statement in regards to LB 43 and its component parts that empowers citizens against big government. And I urge your strong, favorable consideration of AM 2812 and the underlying measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was listening very closely to Senator Conrad's remarks, and I didn't know if she had any more she wanted. Okay. So I will yield the remainder of my time to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cavanaugh. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Brewer, you're recognized to close on the committee amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I need to start by thanking all of the committee members of the government committee. Again, this is a government priority bill that includes Senator Sanders, Senator Hansen, myself, Senator Conrad, and Senator McDonald, and now Senator Albright. And it's really focused around the First Amendment, whether it be freedom of speech, freedom of religion. We had to take a look at how we could build a committee package that included things that we thought we needed. And so when we look at now 2812, which included the old 2649 and 2740. And just as a quick refresher on those, in the AM 2649, that was just an amendment that reworded the bill to make sure that the courts better understand the clarification on the verbiage in that. And then on 2649, that was just amendment that required the removal of the notary and went to the attesting so that we didn't have folks running all over trying to meet that requirement. And then the old 2740, and that was Senator McDonald's bill, and that had to do with the need for a technical fix to make sure that we did not take our state Department of Banking out of compliance with federal law. Ask for your green vote on AM 2812. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2812. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
41 ayes, no nays in adoption of the amendment, Mr. President.
AM 2812 is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for an item.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 43, Senator John Kavanaugh would move to amend with AM 2701.
Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. All right, now we're into the fun part. My ideas. So see, got everybody laughing. Like I said on the last one, I was just telling the speaker back here, I voted for it because nobody dissuaded me from voting for that last amendment. So let's all go into this with an open mind on my amendment. So what does AM 2701 do? It strikes what is currently numbered Section 5 in the original committee amendment. And what that section does is, so Section 5 is on page 3 of AM 2076, and it says the First Freedom Act applies to all state and local laws and the implementation of those laws, whether statutory or otherwise, regardless of whether adopted before or after the operative date of this section. So that's a lot of legal speak, and some of my friends here would say maybe that sentence is over-lawyered, and I'm trying to get it to appropriately lawyered, which I think came from our first round debate on this bill. But reading of that would say there's a couple of things that I think are important. This is a three-line, four-line section, but it does a lot there. What it says is that this whole First Freedom Act that we're talking about applies to all current city ordinances, all current state laws, and all future adopted city ordinances and state laws. So there's a couple of things to be concerned about there. First, there's certainly the intention that this should apply. It's the intention, I would say, of Senator Brewer and those who advocate for this bill, that it would apply to things that we are contemplating. So city ordinances that currently exist, state statutes that currently exist. There's a problem when we say it applies to all subsequently adopted ordinances or statutes. Now, of course, without this section, this bill would still apply to all subsequently adopted city ordinances, because city ordinances do not have the ability to go contrary to state law, meaning that a city can't make penalties higher than what is authorized under state law. They can create their own city penalties that are coextensive with the state law. And the cities can't go against state zoning or other things. So they are limited by what the state law is. So without this paragraph, city ordinances are already limited in the future and retroactively. State statutes, however, there's a real concern, I think, in how this paragraph is written. One, it says applies to all state and local laws. So generally, when we go in and we repeal or we make a new law that applies to some section of statute, we do it by reference, right? We go in and we say, this applies to this section or that section. So if you're sitting here and you're thinking about, I'm going to vote for this because I think it's going to do X, Y, and Z, it's certainly going to do the thing you think it's going to do, but it has the potential to do way more than that because of this expansive section. So that's one of the reasons I think that we maybe need to reconsider this section. And then the last part is that it says whether adopted before or after the operative date of this section. So what we're saying here is that future legislatures, by the definition of this section, would not have the ability to, if we adopt a law, that this would supersede that, which is just simply not the way that this works, right? That a future legislature could adopt some sort of, law that we would think would apply to this. So I'm trying to think of a hypothetical for you, but things that people talk about, the handout will say about the Hobby Lobby case or the Religious Freedom Act applying to the Affordable Care Act. And then you could go in, if this future state legislature adopt that statute, the argument would be that this bill as law would override futurely adopted statutes that pertain to a requirement that an employer provide certain types of health care. And we don't really have the authority to do that. Of course, a future legislature could adopt a law and it would supersede previously adopted laws. So I think that this section 5, is superfluous and confusing and causes problems that I don't think are the intention. And so I think that the parts that the goal it does seek to achieve that we want and that are a good idea, I guess, are the ones that are served without this section. So that's why I propose striking this section. I think it gets rid of surplus language. It makes the bill less confusing and makes sure that it only applies in the instances that we are intending it to apply. And so I would encourage your green vote on AM 2701, and I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions or talk further about it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Duncan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I do rise, I guess, still wanting to talk more about AM 2701 and the underlying LB 43. I would share and I guess echo Senator John Kavanaugh's analysis of whether or not this provision that this amendment strikes is necessary. Anytime we can use the word superfluous on the mic, I think that's always a plus, and so I appreciate that. But I think it's worthy of more conversation to ensure that this is actually achieving what it intends to do. I do want to dive a little bit more, though, into LB 43. Off the mic, I've had a couple of conversations about one of the questions I raised in my first time on the mic today, or maybe second time, and I just wanted to get a little bit more clarity. And it's regarding whether or not the First Freedom Act and is subject to the State Tort Claims Act, or the STCA, or the Political Subdivision Torts Claim Act. That was one of the questions we had with whether or not an individual bringing a suit against a governmental agency would make it subject to the State Torts Claims Act. So I was wondering if Senator Brewer would yield to a question.
Senator Brewer, would you yield to some questions?
Yes.
Hopefully it's just one or two questions. Senator Brewer, you and I had a chance to chat off the mic, and I just wanted to clarify. Is it your understanding that the First Freedom Act would fall under the State Torts Claim Act, or do you believe that it would not apply to the First Freedom Act?
No, it would not apply.
Okay, thank you. I won't continue going down that too much. I appreciate your answer. That was what I was told too. My understanding is that under the way the First Freedom Act is written, the State Torts Claim Act would not apply. And that's for a couple of different reasons. First of all, claims under the First Freedom Act are defined, and tort claims under the STCA and the PSTCA are also defined. Under the State Tort Claims Act, a tort claim means any claim against the state of Nebraska for money only on account of damage to or loss of property or on account of personal injury or death caused by the negligent or wrongful act or omission of any employee of the state while acting within their scope of his or her office or employment. And in relevant part, I want to highlight again, it specifically says for money only. What I think is important to note is that the First Freedom Act that we're talking about here with LB 43 allows for equitable relief. And what I mean by that, colleagues, is it allows for more than just money damages. There's equitable relief like injunctions and other things that are specifically laid out in the statute. So by virtue of the fact that the FFA allows for equitable relief, which is not a claim for quote unquote money only, it would be arguable, and I think it is correct to assume the State Torts Claim Act also does not apply. That's important for a couple of reasons, colleagues. I won't go too deep down the rabbit hole because I'm sure people want to get to lunch here sooner than later. But I think it's an important record to make that the State Torts Claim Act would not apply under FFA. And I think that does allow us to understand a little bit more about what the process and procedure would be if a suit were brought against a political subdivision or a state actor. With that, colleagues, I will continue to echo some of my concerns. I think we might continue to have a little bit of a conversation about this after lunch. I'm not entirely sure. I do think Senator John Kavanaugh's amendment is worth talking about just with regards to the operative nature of what this affects and what it doesn't affect. And I think it's worthy of a conversation. So I continue to be on the fence about LB 43. I think I am supportive of AM 2701, but I hope we can have a little bit more of a debate about this as the day goes on. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I appreciate everybody listening, and it sounds like everybody's on board with this amendment, and you're all just going to vote for it because nobody's opposed to it. So we'll get to vote here and then we can have lunch. This is our first day of all-day floor debate, by the way, friends. So it's going to be a lot of conversations and things kind of go differently than you expect. But like I said, this amendment does not undermine the intention of this bill. You all know I have reservations about this, and I honestly don't know how I'm going to vote on this bill ultimately. But what this does is this amendment strikes out a superfluous section, as Senator Dungan said. I'd also say that the great word would be surplusage, which is extra words that you don't need. So we could get rid of this section and this bill will still have all of the effects that we intend it to have, or that the folks who advocate for it intend it to have. It does not undermine the meaning. It does create more clarity about how it will apply going forward and what the role and interaction between the state and the local governments are, and this legislature's effect on future legislatures. So I would encourage your vote, green vote on AM 2701. And like I said, you make up your own decision on LB 43. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2701. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
12 ayes, 30 nays on adoption of the amendment, Mr. President.
The amendment fails. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Health and Human Services, chaired by Senator Hansen, reports Legislative Bill 871, 1172, 1237, 927, and 1054 to general file, some of those having committee amendments. Additionally, motions to be printed from Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, all to LB 1329. Senator Merman, amendments to be printed to LB 1329. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, motions to be printed to LB 1331. Senator Boston, amendment to be printed to LB 857. Senator Reapy, amendment to be printed to LB 204A. Senator Lowe, amendment to be printed to LB 685. Motion to be printed from Senator Hunt concerning the gubernatorial veto override for LB 307. Notice that the Retirement Committee will have an executive session upon recess in room 2102, retirement 2102 exec session. Natural Resources will have an exec session at 2 o'clock in room 2102. Natural Resources exec session 2 o'clock, room 2102. Mr. President, Senator Aguilar would move to recess the body until 1:30 p.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to recess until 1:30. All those in favor say aye. The motion fails. Returning to debate on LB 43. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Sanders, you're recognized to close and waive.
Yep. Senator Slama for motion.
Senator Slama, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 43 be advanced to ENR for engrossing.
Members, you've heard the motion to advance to ENR engrossing. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. It is advanced. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Aguilar moved to recess the body until 1:30 p.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to recess until 1:30. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. We are recessed.